I think we've got the students in now, John.
It's running, yeah. So hi, everybody. So this webinar today is going to be on abstract reasoning, but people who come regularly are going to realize that I am not Shivam because he's off on study leave. So I'm taking over for the next few weeks. And then when he's off study leave, I suspect he may be coming back. So yeah, so I'm John and I'm here with Ashir today. Do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to run things in the back as usual, but John will be taking over and just teaching you guys some abstract reasoning. So I'll hand it over to you, John.
Yeah, awesome. So a little bit about me first. I'm a final year medical student from Southampton. I've just finished my final exams and I've been tutoring with these guys with Medic Mind for about 3 years now. So abstract reasoning today. This is the sort of introductory session for it. It's a bit of a weird section, as I'm sure a lot of you know, because a problem that a lot of people have with it is that it's not something you'll have done for a long time. For a lot of people, the last time that you'll have had to deal with abstract reasoning will have been the 11 plus exam, however horribly you remember that. So in this lesson, what we're going to hope to achieve in an hour, is to introduce you or get you up to speed with exactly what AR means. We're going to try a warm-up quiz to see where everyone's at with it. Talk about why we actually bother testing it, because it can be quite hard to stay motivated when you're struggling to know exactly why the consortium actually care about this sort of test. Go over a few of the challenges and a few of the do's and don'ts, and of course mixed in heavily with some practice questions for you all. Now, I will be calling on people, names that I see in the chat. So if you're high up in the chat, you're out of luck. And if you're low in the chat, you're more likely. But everyone is welcome to put messages in the chat whenever they want to, because I should be able to see the chat as well. Oh, is that a message saying I can't hear you? Ashir, can we just check that everyone can hear me okay?
I can hear you completely fine.
Okay?
If you're unable to hear John, I would recommend just leaving the meeting and coming back.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, right. So let's start with a little introduction now that everyone's aware that they might be called on. So what the essence of abstract reasoning is these two things. We're looking to spot patterns, and we're looking at the same time to ignore the distractors that are in there. This is one of the key skills that you're going to pick up later as you start improving and you start spotting the common patterns, and this is what we need to be working on at first. In terms of what the section actually entails, it's the last one that you'll face before situational judgment, and it's really, really time pressured. So you'll have 13 minutes to answer 55 questions in 11 sets. So what that gives you is a little over a minute. It gives you 71 seconds per set, but the sets of the vast majority of the questions are going to involve 4 questions. So you're actually going to have a lot less than 70 seconds per question. And when it comes to sets which involve only 1 question, that means that you only have about 15 seconds for one of those. And we'll get into exactly what we mean by what type of set later in the session. So starting with a warm-up quiz. I'll ask people to put in the chat what they think the answer is to these, and I will probably call on somebody as well. If you don't want to turn your mic on, you don't have to turn your mic on. It's optional, but getting involved can be really, really useful, okay? So first one, and I'll give a minute to have a think about this. If you get an answer before that minute, feel free to pop it in the chat. Okay, so I'll start by calling out the first name I see on my screen. I'm sorry, Manvir Banra, is that? Have you got any ideas what you think the pattern might be?
Um, so I think that in set A, all of the shapes are colored in,
Yeah.
and that in set B, all of them are left blank.
Yeah, perfect. Really, really good. So yeah, in set A, what we have is colored shapes in block color, and in set B, we have white shapes only. It's really important to remember in the UCAT that they can use more than just black. So there can be gray, there can be striped, there can be sort of those various different shadings, but they can't use colors. So these set A is all black and set B is all white. So the real question then is, because the 3, 4, and 5 here are all quite obviously one color, but Serena Shah, any ideas where you would put 1 and 2? Okay. If we're unsure, people can type it in the chat. Any ideas what you do with something which doesn't quite fit in either set? Because we can see that 2 has shapes of both colors, black and white. Yeah, perfect. So we're going to go with neither color for that one. So there are 2 circumstances in which we're going to choose neither. That's when, and it's obvious this one, when it genuinely doesn't fit either set, but when it could fit into both sets, you also select neither. So it's if something fits into both, according to the UCAT, it fits into neither, which can be a little counterintuitive, but it's a useful thing to remember. Okay, so next question in the quiz, and we'll go down to 45 seconds for this one. Remembering to try and ignore anything that you think might not be relevant to the pattern, because not everything is in these things. Okay, so that's been 45 seconds. And Ifrat, unfortunately, you're the last person to have typed in the chat. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think the pattern is here? You're also welcome to type if you don't want to turn your mic on. Okay, so if anybody has ideas in the chat, they're very welcome to put them in. Or if anyone has any sort of suspicions about it, not even formed patterns. Okay, so not seeing anything in the chat yet. So what we'll do is, oh, here we go. Wait, no, stuff's coming through. So someone said set A has 2 shapes, one black, one white, which is accurate. So that's true of everything in set A. And then we've got another one saying that set A has a black circle in every box and set B has a white triangle in every box. Yeah. Okay, so the actual pattern here is that set A will always have a black circle and that set B will always have a white triangle. If we want to be more specific in this set, then we could actually say that set B always has an equilateral triangle, because types of triangles often show up as a pattern in the UCAT, and we often see patterns where they'll specify an equilateral or an isosceles or a right-angled triangle. So it's always something to consider. So in this case, any box with a black circle will belong in set A. Any box with a white triangle will belong in set B, and if any boxes have both, they'll belong in neither, because as we said before, one belonging to both sets will belong to neither. Okay, so next question now, and we're coming down to 30 seconds for this, getting closer to what we think in the actual exam we would want to be spending time on. Okay, so really good. On the perfect 30 seconds, we have Suba Imran in the chat saying that set A is all quadrilaterals and set B is all triangles, or also correct, set A four-sided shapes, set B triangles. So yeah, that's perfect. And color isn't a pattern here at all, which is interesting because we can see that there are black and white shapes, but it's actually, we would consider that a distractor. So we're only looking at the number of sides of shapes. An important thing to remember in the UCAT is because this is quite a simplistic pattern with four-sided versus three-sided shapes, it's quite easy to count the sides, but you should remember to not get bogged down in this because a lot of people find this to be one of the easiest patterns to remember. And a lot of people find that they just sort of end up counting for every single question. But if you think we really want you to be spending 40 seconds finding the pattern and then 20 seconds marking the answers, that's your ideal split of time. So if you spend even sort of 10, 20 seconds counting for every single question, you'll waste a lot of your time. So actually it's only in questions like this, where it's fairly simplistic shapes and very few shapes in each box, where you should be thinking about counting as a possible pattern. Okay, so on to the next one, and we're going to stick at 30 seconds for this one. Okay, so that's been 30 seconds. So, okay, and again, in the chat, nice and quickly, that's really, really good. So we're keeping really well to time here. And again, this is another nice simplistic pattern for the warm-up set. We can see that set A has one shape in it, and set B always has four shapes in it. So we can answer accordingly based on that. And again, the color is not actually a pattern here. It is just a distractor to be considering. Okay, so let's move on now to why we test AR. So it does seem counterintuitive, and I'll grant that. And when I was studying for the UCAT, I had no idea why they bothered testing us on this. I just couldn't help but think that my time would be better spent on any of the many subjects we need to do much better in than we do AR. So why bother testing it? And these are just a few reasons. There are more, but really it's about spotting patterns, because so much of medicine is to do with spotting patterns. I don't know if anyone here has seen chest x-rays or ECGs, but a lot of the time when you try and read one of those scans or reports, it's not so much what you see, but it becomes a bit of an instinct, and it becomes a bit of a something doesn't look right there. And recognizing the pattern is so important. Forming links between different things, because you'll take histories from patients all the time, and there'll be things that you need to form links between. So there'll be things that you need to actually work out, and there'll be things that you need to ignore. Because if you imagine this guy here with his arm in a sling and his leg in a cast, these might be distractions from the real serious stuff that you need to look out for. So the AR is really testing which students can do those things best. So that's why we're testing it, and that's why it's important. And if you try to remember the basics of what we teach you, which is that you should be using a structured approach to abstract reasoning questions, you can carry structured approaches through your whole career. Because if, when you learn about reading a chest x-ray, you'll get taught about an A, B, C, D, E approach to that. When you read an ECG, you'll get taught an approach where you go through every individual wave and you assess those. And that systematic approach just becomes so important, and it stays important. So we've talked about one of the reasons people normally hate AR, and that's that you haven't done it in ages. But the other things are, it's very short and it's very time pressured. It's not always obvious how you get better at it. You don't learn it at school, and it requires a hell of a lot of practice to get better at. And we'll go over some strategies for that practice as well. So on to some simple things that we think you should do and you shouldn't do before we really dive into lots of practice questions and lots of thinking about how we approach things. So you should begin by spotting the pattern in set A and set B. And this sounds obvious, but it's in contrast to going ahead and looking straight at the test box, because the test box might not belong to either set. So by looking at the box, you're leading yourself up the garden path. You're giving yourself more distractors. So always begin with the pattern. We should always begin by looking for similarities within the sets and for differences between the sets. So what I mean by that is we're looking for similarities between the boxes if we're comparing 2 boxes from set A or 2 boxes from set B. And we're looking for differences if we're looking for 1 box from set A and 1 box from set B. We should only be spending a minute per set. This is a huge skill within the UCAT and everything else. You need to manage your time well. And if there's a question you're just not getting, I guarantee there will be questions you do in less than a minute. And you can use all of that time you've saved up at the end to come back and do the ones that will take you longer. But in the first instance, we should only be spending a minute. And we should spend less time on type 2 to type 3 questions. I would like some indication, I'm not sure how I can get it, but could people just put yes in the chat if they are familiar with the types of questions and some no's if you're not, just so I can get an idea? Ish. Ish is good. I like ish. Okay, so I'm seeing a mix, but I'm seeing quite a lot of no's here. So we'll get onto those in a while. So don't worry about this for now. Things not to do, as we say, we shouldn't be starting with the test shapes. They can mislead you. We shouldn't be spending too long on questions. And we shouldn't answer test shapes by matching them just to what looks similar. Because remember, these questions were written by people, and as much as it pains me to say it, those people are kind of out to get you. They're kind of out to put in test boxes which look similar, but do not carry the pattern. So it's really important that you're only doing this as a last resort, only if you don't know what the pattern is, then you can try this. But otherwise, we need to find the pattern. So that's the first lesson. So from that lesson, do we have any questions? If people want to whack them in the chat, just because if they're here now, then we can come back to them at the end and talk about any specific questions from lesson 1. But just pop them in the chat now if you have them. And we'll move on to talking about the question types, which we have a lot of ishes and kind ofs and a lot of no's and much fewer yeses. So type 1 to type 4, these are all the questions you'll encounter. So let's talk about type 1 questions. So type 1 questions, I will scroll straight down to this before we actually talk about the timing, so you have some kind of idea, and we'll talk about the answer to this in a minute. But let's have a look at this type of question. So this is the one where on your UCAT screen, you'll see set A and set B on the left, and then you'll see one of these boxes at a time. So these won't all come up at once as they do in this picture. You'll see box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, box 5, one after the other. Now, you have roughly 60 seconds for the pattern and 5 questions. So what we tend to recommend is that you're taking maximum 40 seconds to find the pattern and 20 seconds to place the shapes. It is important to leave yourself a little bit of time because you don't want to slip up at the last minute on these things. Okay, so let's move on to this question and looking to try and find a pattern. Oh, I actually give you the answer there, my apologies. Trying to find a pattern for it. Okay, so I'll start the timer now and we'll give you 40 seconds as we were just saying. Okay, so that's been 40 seconds. So I'll ask again, we're going to go for the last person to type in the chat. Oh, wait, here we go. Oh, we've got an answer, which is good. So set A, someone has said set A if diagonal all white, if not checkered, and reverse for set B. Okay, so anyone else have any other ideas, or is this what we're working on? I'll give a few seconds for any further ideas in the chat if people have them. Okay, good. So people seem to be fairly in agreement with Abia here. Yeah, so this is a really good spot because this is a slightly trickier question. So yeah, what we're looking at here is if we find two boxes in set A to compare, we might start with these two. And we might sort of say that the differences between these are that there's a cross, well, there's sort of a plus symbol and that there's a cross symbol. And then we can look at the differences and similarities here. So similarities wise, there's always a shape at the end of every line. And the shapes are always colored. But we do notice, as Abia noted at first, that the crosses all seem to have white shapes at the end. And remembering that the pattern in set B is often the inverse, or at least similar to the pattern in set A, it's sensible to immediately go and have a quick look at the other equivalent. So in set B, all the crosses we know are black. So there's our pattern. So we can go and have a look at the answers now, and we can see that this one is going to belong in neither set because it's a cross which has more than one color. And as Fionn noted here, diagonals should all be one color. This one could belong in either set, couldn't it? This one's a tricky one because you would think that it should belong in one of them, but actually there's no hard and fast rules about these crosses, the plus signs, I should say. And because there's no hard and fast rules about them, this one could belong in either set. So because it's in either, as we said, it's neither. Option 3 here, this one belongs in set B because it's all black and it's a cross. 4 is a plus sign. And we might think initially that as I think it's Suba Imram noted, the opposite shapes must be this. Oh, wait, no, sorry, that's about shape. Somebody else had noticed that. So yeah, if not checkered and reverse. So actually, not every box in both sets is checkered with the plus signs, are they? We have a plus sign in set B where everything's the same color. So this continues to enforce for us that there are no hard and fast rules about the plus signs. It's just that they're not always the same color. So once again, 4 is going to belong to neither set. And finally, 5 is going to belong to set A. Okay, so that's our classic type 1 question. These are the most common. So these are kind of the most important to master, and they're the most important to master in good timing, because as long as you get these in good timing, you'll give yourself a little bit more time for the other question types. So that's your type 1 question, one after the other, and one question after the other, and they are 40 seconds to find the pattern, 20 seconds to answer. So now we're on to type 2. Type 2s are a bit scary because you only have 15 seconds per pattern, and there's only ever one question per pattern. These are sequence questions. So slightly differently to our technique for type 1s, where we're assessing either two boxes from the same set, so we're assessing 2 of set A and looking for similarities, or assessing 1 from set A, 1 from set B and looking for differences. Here we're looking for between adjacent boxes, and we're only noticing the differences. So with all that in mind, I will give 30 seconds for this one because we're just starting out. But just remember that that is double what you would have in the exam. So try to be thinking about how you might start to cut that time down. Okay, perfect. So we have an early answer from Suba and Jay in the chat. And does anybody have any disagreements with what these two have said? Or 3 now with Bajan. Okay, good. So Suba's given a good point here that there clearly have to be 5 shapes in the next. So let's go over the pattern briefly for anyone that may have missed it. So if we use the technique we've just talked about, so we're going to start by looking between box 1 and 2 and just articulate the differences. This isn't a trick question and it never will be. So we can say that the difference between these two boxes is that in box 2, we have the same shape, it's slightly moved position to up and to the left. We have a new shape, which is black and is a triangle. These are all the differences. Some of those differences are going to be distractors, but it's still worth noting all of them because any one of them might be the pattern. So then we can look between boxes 2 and 3. And we can say that now the shape that appeared in the last box has changed color, become white, moved upwards, and we have a new shape which has appeared, and this shape is also black. So first of all, we're noticing that, yes, between box 1 and 2, the original shape moved, but there's no obvious pattern for how it moved. In the first one, it moved up and slightly to the left. In the second box, it just moved up. So we're thinking that maybe that movement may not constitute part of the pattern. And then from the third to the final box, we have that another shape has appeared now, and it's also black, and the original shape has gone to white. So perfect. So everything that's being said in the chat is awesome. It's all really good stuff. So yes, there definitely have to be 5 shapes in the next one. And what else needs to be true? So we can, which one can we eliminate based on this? Yeah, perfect. We can eliminate C. And based on the color pattern we've noticed, yeah, so Jay said B and C. Jay, if you want to pop your mic on, or Victoria, why are you eliminating B?
Shapes, whereas you need to have one black colored shape.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. You need to have one black colored shape. So C has 4 shapes. B has no black shapes. So we've noticed every single time, what have we noticed? Which shape is black? The new shape. Yeah, perfect. The new shape is black. So the answer in this case has to be D. Now, somebody did rightly notice that we need to have, I'm just trying to see who it was. Well, it doesn't matter who it was, but somebody did rightly note that this shape has stayed in the top left for the whole time. But we had noticed that there didn't appear to be a pattern with how the shapes were moving when a new one was added. And certainly there was no consistent way in which that was happening. So actually it doesn't matter where this shape is, as long as it's still there, which it is, it's moved to the bottom right. So D is definitely the answer here. And again, this is where we get into this avoiding distractors part of our exam. Okay, really good work, everyone. On to type 3 questions now. These type 3 questions are also descriptive ones. The main skill that you need here is description. So we're finding a pattern linking box A and box B, and we're applying the same pattern to box C. So this is A is to B as C is to D, essentially, and we're trying to find D. So again, it's 1 question per pattern. So this is another short one. So this is 15 seconds per pattern. So as before, let's have a look at an example. And we'll give 30 seconds for this. I hope my cat in the background isn't too distracting. I apologize for her. Okay, and we have 5 seconds left. We're approaching that 30-second mark. She is a bit grumpy. Nobody else is home. Okay, perfect. So that's been 30 seconds. So let's have a look at what people are saying. So we've got from Kanishk, we've got a 90-degree turn anti-clockwise. And we've also got from Kanishk that the shape is turning black as well. So any ideas from people what the answer is to this question? Okay, so a few different sort of options here, but in this case, the answer is A. So the really important thing to remember here is that description is so pivotal to these questions, understanding how to perfectly describe every change that has taken place in one sentence. So here, it's not enough to just say that it turns into from a white shape to a black shape. It's not enough to say that it rotates. It's not even enough to say that it rotates 90 degrees. The really critical thing here is that it rotates 90 degrees counterclockwise and turns black. Because that way we can take this shape, take the top point of it here, rotate it 90 degrees counterclockwise and turn it black. So this point ends up down here as this hypotenuse turns to face that way. Okay, so that's the trick to these ones, is making sure that you're as precise as you possibly can be in your descriptions of what's happening. And again, this is just to reiterate the obvious. I'm sure everyone remembers this perfectly well because I keep going on about it, but it's really important that you spend less time on these questions. If you cannot find the pattern, you need to mark an answer, flag the question, and move on. Okay. An additional thing to remember with timing in the abstract reasoning section is you can use your whiteboard or your flag function, depending on how sure you are. So for instance, if we have a question where we're pretty sure we've got, let's go back up to this one, where we're pretty sure that we know we need one with 5 shapes and we need one of those shapes to be black, but we haven't quite cracked in 15 seconds that it has to be the new shape. You know you've got a 50% chance of getting this answer. So you might just mark A or D and write that down on your whiteboard as a return to if I have time. And then for ones which you have no idea about, so let's say you're looking at this one, you just can't seem to find anything that would suggest an answer, you can flag that one. So you have your flagged, which is absolutely return to if I have time, and you have whiteboard, which is return to if I've done all of my flagged ones that I really have no idea about. Okay? So moving on to our last type of question, which is type 4. And type 4 is essentially the same as type 1, which is why it's so important to get to grips with type 1. So we're spotting a pattern for set A and set B, and there's 5 questions, and you have 60 seconds for the pattern and the questions. Now, this is how these questions appear. So on your UCAT screen, you'll have set A and set B, and you'll have this whole set of 4, and you'll have to choose which of those fits into set A. So we'll give you 30 seconds to have a look at this and try and find a pattern. Remember, I'm giving you slightly less time than you would have in the UCAT. In terms of access to the slides, I'll have to ask Ashir. I'll ask at the end of this lesson if he can just let us know if you guys are able to access these slides. Okay, and that's the 30-second mark. So does anyone have any idea what's going on with this pattern? Okay, so Kanishka coming in quick off the mark, really good timing there. Anyone got any other ideas about what the pattern might be? Yeah. So everyone's getting pretty much the correct thing here, yeah. So we always have, in both sets, they will feature an outer shape, which is black, and an inner shape, which is white. So that's one important thing to remember, right? So if we end up with any white shapes containing black shapes, they wouldn't belong anywhere because this is a rule that's true of both sets. So in set A, people have rightly noticed that the outer shape is a circle. In set B, the outer shape is a square. And the inner shapes in set A have straight sides. The inner shapes in set B have curved sides. Or at least one curved side, we should say, because remember, again, this is so important, the description. We have a shape here that has one straight side. So we can't say that set B contains entirely curved shapes, only that it contains shapes with at least one curved side. Okay, so moving on from that, Let's go with Theon. Which of the following fits into set A for the first set?
D.
D, yeah, perfect, because we have a straight-sided star inside a black circle. And then we'll go for Zach for the second one. Which of the following fits in set B? Yeah, perfect, see? And then for the last one, let's go with Suba. And we're going for D. Yeah, perfect, because we have a curved-sided crescent moon inside a black square. Awesome. So now we're getting into the real technique of it all. Okay, so this is the important thing for the UCAT. Ultimately, if you remember a solid technique for all of this, then you'll approach every question the same. Approaching every question the same will, one, it will let you spot more patterns, but two, it does stop you panicking. And I've got to say, a lot of time-pressured exams, I and a lot of other people waste a hell of a lot of time panicking, right? So, you know, I think the best example of this later in medicine is we have to do an SJT at the end of medical school as well. And it's reasonably time pressured. And you walk into that test and you see some weird question and you're in the Pearson View Center where you do your driving test. And you do panic. So as long as you have a technique where you're ready to say, well, I'm going to start by looking at this, you'll do a lot better overall. So this is what we advise for type 1 questions. Let's start just by looking at sort of the notation I'm going to use. This is pretty much exactly what you'll see on your screen. So remember, for type 1 questions, you'll see the first box and there'll be 5 questions for each set. So what we're going to do is from now on, I will be calling this box 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll say, like, what do we think of box 5 set A or something? It just makes our life a little bit easier. And of course, I'll hover my mouse over it too. Remember, type 1 questions are the most common types. So let's start with an example and think about the timing here. Think about how you might make your timing a little bit better. So I will set a timer for 30 seconds, but if anybody finds the pattern here, let me know in the chat. Okay, any ideas from the chat on what the pattern here is? Yep, so we've got an all black even sides in set A. Okay. So this is quite a simple pattern, and you're forgiven for not seeing the wood for the trees here, but it's a black in set A and a white in set B. So in terms of the technique, what you want to do for these, and this is a slightly more complicated one, which is why I've moved on to it rather than laboring the point of all black in set A versus all white in set B. What we're trying to do here is find simple boxes, and I'm sure I have slides that actually last. Yeah, there we go. So we're trying to find simple boxes with which we can spot similarities. So the first approach we're going to go for is we're going to try and look at 2 simple boxes in set A. So can people put their suggestions in the chat for the simplest boxes in set A? Yeah, I'm hearing a 2 and a 5. I'm hearing a 1, 2, and 5. I'm seeing lots of 2s and 5s. I'm seeing it all top right, bottom left, yeah? Because they have one shape in them. So it's nice and easy to assess. So similarities then between these boxes. Can people pop in ideas for their similarities between these boxes? And it can be anything. It can be as simple as you want. Okay, so we got a 1 shape. We got a 1 line of symmetry. Yeah. Shape is positioned in the center. All shapes with a curve are gray. Yeah, right. So these are all really, really good similarities. And this just shows you, I suppose, you know, when you ask a chat of 63 people, it's way better than tutoring just one, right? Because it really proves the point here that there are a hell of a lot of similarities between even two boxes with one shape in them. And different people looking at those will see different similarities. So now what we've got to do with all of those in mind is to think about whether those similarities apply to all of the boxes. So let's start with Suba said one line of symmetry. So remember, lines of symmetry can apply either to the boxes or they can apply to the shapes. And we need to work out whether every shape in set A has at least one line of symmetry. And I personally am not seeing any shapes that don't. So yes, every shape in set A has one line of symmetry. So we can look to set B, because it might be that every shape in set A has one line of symmetry and every shape in set B has no line of symmetry. But immediately on checking a simple box in set B, we see 4 squares, which all have one line of symmetry. So that is our rule for whether a similarity can be a pattern or not. First of all, if it applies to every box in set A, and it has to be every box in set A, it could be a pattern. If it doesn't then apply to any box in set B, it could very much be a pattern. Okay, it will be a pattern. But unfortunately, that's not one. So we'll look for another, and we'll see whether, as Adina said, shape is positioned in the center. Well, we see in this box that there aren't shapes in the center. So moving on, Saida said that there's one shape in each, which is absolutely true. So again, we can say, is there one shape in every box? And the answer to that is no. Obviously, we have more than that. But we can think actually about the characteristics of the number of shapes. So 1 is an odd number. And so we can try and see, as has been mentioned by Kanishk, odd number of shapes in set A and even number of shapes in set B. So actually, we do see that that's true of every single box in set A, that every single box has an odd number of shapes. Now we need to see if that's true of anything in set B, because remember, if it is, it can't be a pattern. Something which is true of boxes in both sets won't be a good pattern. So in set B, yeah, there are no boxes with an odd number of shapes, all even, so that's our pattern here. Okay, so we can scroll down now because these slides are essentially just saying what we said, and we can place all of these based on the number of shapes in the boxes. Okay, and remember, a test shape can look really similar, and this is why we say it's really important to not group your test shapes based on how they look, because here we have a certain number of crosses, and so do we here, but this belongs in set A, not set B. So just a reminder to be as vigilant as possible. Often, the patterns are the inverse. So in the case of this last one, that's dead easy, right? We all know opposite of odd, even, so we can look for that in set B. If they're not inverse, they're probably related. And that's also really important to remember, because it might be the case that maybe there's, for instance, if we had boxes with squares and circles, and the pattern was that there was one more square than circle in set A, the pattern might not be that there's one more circle than square in set B. It might be that there's 2 more squares than circles. So it's not always perfect inverse, but that's the first thing to check for, because more often than not, it is the case. So some examples here. And again, I'm not going to ask what the opposite of symmetry is, because we all know. Okay. So predict the inverse. Always look for the inverse. Now, let's have a look at this one and have a think about what we might see as a pattern. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. You've got 5 seconds left. Okay, any ideas? Okay, yeah, and we're beginning to see that we're recycling questions a little bit to make our point. But of course, you know, if in the case of more complicated patterns than these, it's so helpful to have that structure in your head, okay? And that structure is to find the two simple boxes in set A, which, you know, is this number 4 is almost certainly going to be one of the simple boxes, and then we can choose any of these as another one, and we look for similarities. Now, it's important to remember here, as we said earlier, we need to try and remember that the people who write these questions are trying to catch you out. So has anyone spotted the trick in this question? Did anyone have a thought about what it might be and then get disproven? You can say that in the chat if you did. So we've got some mentions of color and shading, and that's absolutely right. That's quite a common trap. And yeah, we've got the same shapes from Suba. So yeah, it looks at first, doesn't it, like we have another 4-sided, 3-sided pattern. But when you make sure of all of the boxes that that's true, then we'll see that there are triangles in set A and there are quadrilaterals in set B. Okay, so that's the thing to remember, is always make sure that things are true of every box in the set. Okay. And as before, 40 seconds pattern, 20 seconds for the test shapes. Don't neglect this 20 seconds. Once you've found the pattern, you have the marks. They're right there. They're guaranteed. So spend the time to get the test shapes right. Okay. So I think we've been over sort of this bit earlier on, neither or both. That's a really important thing to remember. We've talked about flagging and guessing and using the whiteboard and when you might be able to do that. So let's just have a look at another question now. And this one involves arrows. It's a bit of a wacky one. Okay, so you have 30 seconds to have a look at this. Okay, we have 5 seconds left here. Yeah, okay. So people have got the idea in the chat that this is to do with the directions of the arrows, which is fantastic. You should have that idea. So there are 3 things that should make you think about directions and pointing. Those things are arrows, triangles, and clock faces. So any of those things can be pointing somewhere. So once again, let's get some candidates for simple boxes. Are there any boxes that are particularly more simple in set A? I don't think so. So let's put some similarities in the chat between these first 2 boxes of set A here. Yeah, arrows are all pointing right and down. Yeah, perfect. I mean, this is the main similarity, isn't it? Because these are very simple shapes and they can only really do one thing, which is point. So yeah, arrows are pointing right and down, and that's our pattern. And as other people have pointed out, in B, we've got arrows pointing up and left. So we can place these based on that. And this is another perfect example of being careful with your test shapes, because remember, you do need to carefully assess whether down and right or up and left. If there's a box with more than that, then of course it's going to be neither. So up, left, and right can't belong to either set. So inverse patterns, every box, your timings, your distractors, these are the main things to be thinking about for the abstract reasoning section. Okay, and we've been over our step by step, but I'll hold it on the screen for a second just to give you that sort of understanding of it. So we're identifying the simplest box. Let's go down to our actual 4-step diagram. If we have it on these slides, I hope we do. Yeah. So we're looking at the simplest boxes. We're focusing on set A first. We're looking for the similarities. Any one of those similarities could be the pattern. So it's important to practice defining the similarities. Use the inverse rule. So it may be the perfect inverse, but it's almost certainly related. So if it's not the perfect inverse, don't panic, just look for a related one. And we use triggers, which we'll get into in a little bit. I'm aware I'm running short on time, so I'm just pushing through these a little bit quicker. And remember, if you're running out of time, checking every box is a good idea. But if you're running out of time and you've checked 4, it might be worth taking the odds and running with it. And maybe this is another candidate for writing down on your whiteboard. Okay? Really useful thing to do is remember these. These are the commonest shapes you'll see in the UCAT, and you will not need to waste time counting sides, particularly for this massive one, if you know it's just got 24 sides. Okay, so that's a really useful thing to do. This table is a really useful thing to memorize. Okay, so we've talked about looking at set A altogether, but let's do an example here where it's a little bit difficult. So have a look at this. Can anyone identify a pattern for this set with set A alone? And I'll give you maybe 20 seconds for that. It is possible to do, but it's difficult. So if anyone can, awesome. If not, we'll talk about what else can be done. Okay, so I'm seeing nothing in the chat. This is a difficult one. We've got total sides are even. We've got one. Okay, so we've got one line of symmetry from Zach. So we'll hold that thought on the symmetry, and we'll show you the next set, show you how this makes it easier. Take a deep breath, sit back in the chair, and just have a look at these two sets next to each other. Don't select individual boxes. Don't get down to the details like counting. What is the difference between these two sets? Very broadly speaking. Any ideas? Or what do you notice about these two sets? And it doesn't have to be an exact pattern either. It can just be an observation. Okay, so yeah, so we've got from Harini, really good. And we've got from Fionn spaced out. We've got from Harini, we've got some sort of arrangement and more random. We've got neater, we've got a mess, and these are all the right words that we notice when we just take the time to see the wood for the trees, and when we take the time to think about it. So actually, coming back to what Zach said, yes, there are lines of symmetry, and this is to do with the boxes. So I'm trying to find an actual good example for this. No, there's nothing where we've actually marked the lines of symmetry, but yeah, so every single box in set A has at least one line of symmetry, whereas none of them in set B have one line of symmetry. Okay, and this is a chance where if you hadn't noticed this in your 40 seconds, this is where making an educated guess would help you. Yeah, sure, we don't advise it all the time, but if you're really unsure, you could probably confidently say this belongs to set A and you'd get it right. Okay. Remember that tactic, okay? Deep breath, sit back, just look. Your gut is often right. And especially when you're right on the day of the UCAT and you've been revising for months and you've got really used to it, your instinct is even more likely to be right. So follow it, trust yourself, confidence. These are all really important things. Okay. Haven't had time to go over sponks today, unless I'll ask Ashir if he wants to wrap up here, actually, because we only have a few minutes left. But
hey, John. So I think that should be enough for today, actually,
awesome.
for the students. But yes, we're just going to go into the Q&A bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, no
problem. Yes, if you guys have any questions, feel free to just unmute yourselves and ask John or myself. We'll just spend a couple of minutes. But before we also go into that, I'm also going to share our Trustpilot with you, because there's a lot of work that actually goes into making these webinars and hosting them to you. So we'd really appreciate if you can actually scan this QR code and just leave us a quick review. So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds just to do that. And also, we are running a UCAT live course as well. So that's basically it's a 7-hour event that we do for students, and it involves about an hour and a half on each section on the UCAT, we'll be going through the verbal reasoning, the quantitative reasoning, decision making, and all the different sections, basically going through the most important aspects. And it's great for revision. John is going to be hosting a few as well. There'll be other tutors that have been with us for several years, and they'll be giving you some really good techniques that are exclusive to us. And it's really great to sort of consolidate your learning with. So we are also providing a half-an-hour free lesson with that. So if you guys are interested, you can actually scan this QR code, which I'll show on the next slide. But here's the timetable roughly. You can scan this, and when you actually do book it for the 12th of June, we'll give you 30 minutes of free one-to-one tutoring. And what I'll do is on the WhatsApp group chats we're in, I'll send you the link for this as well. So if you want to book it via WhatsApp, you can do that in your own time. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask us, or you can message us in the chat.
Yeah, so we have a few questions in the chat. Before we get into those, really good job, so everyone. I know sitting around for an hour can be difficult, especially at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday. So awesome job, really good. Keep doing what you're doing, and I'm sure everyone here will be fine. So questions then. Are the previous webinars available anywhere if we missed them? I'll have Ashia confirm this, but I believe they're on YouTube. Is that right?
Yes, so all of these are live streamed to YouTube. So if you just type up YouTube Medic Mind, if you're subscribed to us and turn the bell icon on as well, you'll automatically get any alerts for previous ones being uploaded. So these are automatically live streamed. You can come back and view them as well. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you should be able to see this under our live stream as well.
It's also worth noting that our YouTube channel has loads of videos filmed and recorded, which go through lots of our slides and lots of the content which is available. So in response to Zach's question, and again, I will ask Ashia to confirm this because most of the time I am just tutoring. I don't handle most of the sort of YouTube-y stuff, but I believe there would be a lesson on triggers on YouTube. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So there's lots of resources for you to use. I'm going to be also putting a link for you guys just to join the WhatsApp group chat where we actually post any links for future webinars and any useful links for you guys. And it's just worth joining this because we'll give you alerts when we're about to do the next webinar, any links for the recordings, and then any special offers we have as well, such as the UCAT Live Day. So that's quite exclusive. And if you want to book that, you can just use that link, the QR code that's up there. I'll also be sending a link in the Zoom chat for you guys if you want to go ahead and book that. So I've just sent the WhatsApp group chat link, so feel free to just join that.
And Ashia, if you're happy as well, I'll pop a link for the YouTube pattern triggers video, which is on our Medic Mind channel. Is that?
That's absolutely fine, yes. I think that would be really good for the students to actually view in their own time. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so I'll pop that link in the chat for you, Zach, and anyone else who's interested in triggers. It's a really useful thing to revise, and there's a big course available on YouTube totally for free there. So final question that I'm noticing here is from Jay, which is, should we give ourselves 2 weeks or more to revise for the UCAT? The short answer to that is it's all personal and depends on your confidence level and how much preparation you've done before. Often what you'll hear recommended and what I think is sensible is between 2 to 6 months of preparation. But if you give yourself 2 to 4 weeks, it's just about appreciating that you might have a little less time to go through the detail and to focus on the really important stuff, which I would say the important stuff to give you if you find yourself with 2 weeks to go is the structures, as with abstract reasoning, we have compare the simplest boxes and then use our Sponks framework. In verbal reasoning, we have the keyword technique. These are the things that you focus on if you have a little bit less time, because these are the things that boost your timings and your score a lot. Okay. And then recommend studying on a daily basis. Again, that's pretty much entirely based on what you've done before. But the thing to remember is that it's not so much about how much you do on a daily basis, but consistency. It's about you know, even if you're not doing a daily basis, if you're doing a couple of hours a week, it's that you're keeping that up and that you're not doing it in these bitty sections and forgetting what you've learned. The other thing is it's important to build your stamina. So it's important to do entire mocks back to back rather than just doing the verbal reasoning section and getting a coffee and the abstract reasoning section. Okay. Don't think there are any further questions there in the chat. Hopefully I mostly lived up to Shivam. I've seen his streams, they're really, really good.
No, definitely. I think the students all enjoyed that. Thank you so much, John. And it's been a pleasure seeing you guys, and best of luck with your preparation. We'll be doing the SJT one next week, so please join that WhatsApp group so we can send you the link closer to the time, and John will be joining us for that as well. Take care, guys.
Take care, guys. See you all next week.